Welcome to week 9 of EIA 2020. So we are formally kicking off the Rosny Hill case study this week, having introduced some of the bigger picture last week. And I'm delighted that the focus is not on me or Bumfu this week. It's on our KGA 581 class who've been digesting this case study since week 2 or 3. I think some of us met in the field on Rosny Hill in week 3. So I am going to change a couple of things. So it's 2:04. If team 1 are ready to start, we're ready to throw over to you.
Okay, cool. So the format will just be that I'll be presenting some stuff, and then Mario will present some stuff as well. So I'm ready to begin whenever you like, Emma. Okay. Well, now might as well be it then. So hi everyone. I'm Tony, and so on behalf of my group, the members are listed on the right of the slide there. I'll be providing some background on the proposed Rosny Hill development, and then Mario will take over to fill in some of the details. So if Mario changes the slide, this aerial image on the right here provides a nice view of the proposed site situated in context of its surroundings. And so, as you can see, it's an elevated site. It's composed of mostly remnant native bushland, and it's surrounded by significant suburban and urban areas. This also shows its proximity to major centres such as Rosny, and even in a straight line. So as the crow flies across the river, even Hobart itself. And I think seeing the site situated in this way should give you some indication of not just its physical, but also its significant social location as well. So next slide. This image was taken from near the main lookout on the site, it's one of its main features and is partly a focus of the development. And you can see here some of the native vegetation in the foreground. But also the significance of the lookout itself, and that the site is quite prominent and visible from all of its surroundings. So something to take into consideration, that anything that's developed on this site will be visible from all of these places that the site overlooks. And if we move on to the next slide. So, as I mentioned, there are numerous native flora and fauna species present on the site. The image on the right here provides a graphical representation of the extent of the native flora species, and the red outline is the proposed extent of the development itself. So the development isn't the entire site, it's within this sort of red boundary that you can see described by the red line. So on the next slide, given its location, it's unsurprising that there is an important that it is an important social site as well. It's basically a native green space in what is otherwise quite a developed area. So it tends to be used for all manner of recreation and does have significant social value. And on the next slide, Mario, it's worth bearing in mind that the developer, having been involved in Sapphire at Freycinet, is not unfamiliar with developing in sites that are environmentally, socially, and visibly significant. So this image on the left here shows Sapphire with the famous hazards in the background. So it should give a little bit of context as to the sorts of developments that this developer is, familiar with working on. And so next slide, Mario. Primarily what's being proposed is a 60-room hotel complex, which will consist of a main building, which will basically run around the left edge of the oval that's in the middle of the image there, and some outlying pods, which are right at the top of the image there, this image being oriented north. North is up in this image. Much of the hotel will be situated below the level of the hilltop and will actually have vegetated rooftops in parts. Public access to the lookout will remain. So right at the bottom left of the image, you can see what is the existing public parking spot and the existing public viewing area. And that's where the image that I showed earlier was actually taken from, looking southwest over to Hobart. So those public parking spaces will remain, and additional public parking spaces will also be provided. And there'll be a cafe and some public toilets as well. And obviously, given the extent of the development, it will necessitate some infrastructure such as road widening and plumbing into existing public plumbing infrastructure as well. So on the next slide, Mario. Ultimately, this application was approved by Council and the EPA, but given the significant public interest, the approval was appealed and has become the subject of a RAMPAT hearing, which was scheduled for this month, but it has since been postponed. Thanks, and over to Mario.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Now I'm going to talk about the current environmental impact assessment studies that have been conducted in the proposed development area. First is natural value report, and the second is bushfire hazard report, assessment report. Habitat assessment and sun orchid assessment is conducted by North and Barker. And there is also a traffic impact assessment from Midson Traffic Company. And the last two are acoustic and visual reports. And from these documents, we will present the impact during the construction and after construction, or when the project begins. And the first report is a natural value report, which aim to identify and mapping or the zone or endangered flora and fauna communities, and also evaluate if there are any ecological impact from the development area. During the construction, there's a possibility of alien species that in entering the area, and the construction can also facilitate the spreading of existing weeds, which can disturb the vegetation around the area. And although the report says that there is a minimum impact after the construction, Greening Australia recommends to establish a Part 5 agreement to facilitate the implementation of vegetation management when the project begins. And the second report is bushfire hazard assessment report. Because the Rosny Hill Nature Recreation Area is located in bushfire-prone area, it requires a specific management plan, which is a bushfire management plan. And during the implementation, it will impact approximately 3 hectares of native vegetation. And during the construction, there's a clearance of Alocasuarina verticillata forest, or NAV. And also there's a lowland grassland complex, or GCL. And it's categorized as high flammability, so it needs to be cut or be clearance. And after the construction, there are more and more native vegetation species that I have mentioned before will be pruned to minimize the risk of bushfire in proposed area. And the third assessment is habitat assessment. The document has presented 2 fauna species, which are eastern barred bandicoot, which lists as a vulnerable species under the EPBC Act, and tussock skink, which are also listed as a vulnerable species under the Tasmanian Threatened Species Protection Act. The document says that both construction and post-construction activities in the proposed development area will cause habitat degradation or the decreasing of habitat quality that will cause the result of habitat loss. And the impact will also come from the invasion of alien species or a disease that come into the area. And here at the bottom left, we can see the eastern barred bandicoot and the habitat around the area. And the bottom right is tussock skink and the habitat in the Rosny Hill. And this is for the sun orchid studies. The leafy sun orchid is categorized as an endangered species from the TSP Act, and the main population is located around the Rosny Hill itself. And during the construction, there will be a big chance of the changes of environment that could cause the decreasing of habitat quality. And the post-construction impact will be a competition with invasive species that have entered in the area and cause the decreasing of long-term habitat quality. And from the traffic impact assessment, there's estimated 400 trips per day after the construction finish. And this is a concern from Friends of Rosny Hill community, because they say the project is too big to be conducted in this area. And because the improper condition in the current road, they will improve the road, the side of the road, and will cause the removal of trees. And the post-construction impact will be a disturb the species and also human around the area. And for the acoustic report, they compare the predicted noise emission and the legislation standard, which is from Clarence Interim Planning Scheme from 2015, and the predicted noise are acceptable based on this report. And for the construction and post-construction impact will be will bother the fauna around the surroundings area. And from the visual impact, they visualize the area into a 3D model and a montage picture here. So they put the animation, so we can see that on the picture here, there is a project development that already finished. So it like a blur or the same color with the forest around there. So it can be disturbed aside from the species of the bird. And then for the ongoing management or monitoring that occur in the area, the first is Rosny Hill Reserve Bushfire Management, which control and monitor to eliminate bushfire risk. And there's a Nature Conservation Act, which have a partnership between the state government and Clarence City Council. And there's also a weed management, which manage the weeds such as blackberry, fennel, and the extra. And the Commonwealth Environmental Protection Biodiversity Act, which protect the threatened flora and threatened species. It seems like Threatened Species Protection Act. And there's also Aboriginal Relic Act, because this area, there was an original territory for the Oyster Bay people. And the last content is our prediction of RMP80 outcomes. And our assumption of our prediction from the tribunal is the tribunal will accept or will receive this project because of the reasons. The first is the project will improve natural value or revegetate the native plants. It also improve the public firefighting facilities and also improve the management plan for natural and recreation values. And the main reason is it will improve the economic value. And this is our reference in that our group have cited from these documents. And thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, recommendations, we will open the discussion right now.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Can I stop sharing, or I just put it like
Sure,
this?
yes, yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions while people get the brains into gear. I know Bunfu's probably got a couple of questions as well, and some comments.
I'm sorry if it's too fast.
No, it was good. It was good. So I think that was really good to point out that Robert Morris Nunn had done Sapphire, because obviously they had their work cut out for them in that situation as well. It was sensitive in all sorts of ways, much like Rosny Hill is. Rosny Hill is obviously set in a much more heavily populated area. Nevertheless, there was a lot of focus on Sapphire, and yeah, it's an important place to a lot of people. And there's a very active planning community on the East Coast that is very adept at commenting on proposals. So I thought that was really good. Can anyone in the group comment on the significance of clearing the Alocasuarina and the lowland grassland complex? Do you get the impression from reading the documents that this is something that's of concern or not such a big deal?
Yeah, I try to answer because that communities, it categorized as a high flammability, but it's not listed as an endangered or it's not listed as a vulnerable species. Maybe it's not a big concern to remove or to, but our group think that it will impact the ecosystem around the area.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And following up from that, we know that the site is already quite weedy, and you mentioned that there's a concern about invasive species during construction. I'm just wondering whether somebody can comment on that, because my impression from both council and proponent was that part of the kind of lure of developing the area was to clean it up a bit and get rid of some of the weeds. Does somebody want to have a go at commenting on that?
And based on the reading, they also they mentioned about the invasion of the alien species, like from outside, could be from wood workers, or could be from the soil, from the heavy equipment. So it can like introduce a new species of weed or new disease around the environment. It can disturb or it can like affect the natural or the endemic species around there.
It might be worth mentioning as well that it's not really in the interest of the developer to have ugly invasive species in the area. So given that they're pumping a whole bunch of money into this, they have a financial interest in investing in weed removal. Turning it into an ugly, barren weed-filled paddock is certainly not going to be in their interest.
Yeah, that's a good point, particularly after the stoush that they've had with Friends of Rosny Hill and others. Yeah, you would hope that they'd be on their very best behaviour in terms of managing the area around the development, you would hope. Banfu or others, have you got questions? Andre's got a question. Would you like to unmute and ask? Or do you want me to read it out?
I can ask. With the firefighting facilities improved potentially, does the risk of wildfire increase or decrease with this development? And does that trigger a need for increased firefighting capabilities?
Yep. Again, I might just say that it's probably not. It's not in the proponent's interest to have wildfires in an area where they've spent a significant amount of money on infrastructure. Any wildfire in the area is likely to also affect their buildings. So it's certainly not in their interest to have the area become say overgrown and those sorts of things. But we do need to obviously be aware of the fact that with greater traffic and more people coming into the area, there is obviously a heightened risk. So the improved firefighting facilities, I think, are intended to offset that risk or to mitigate that risk. And I think probably the question is, will they mitigate it to the extent that it's kept the risk is as it is now, or can it be mitigated to the extent that the chance of fire is actually less than it is now? That I think is an unanswered and probably unanswerable question.
Yeah, particularly with the uncertainties around changing climate, a lot of environmental impact assessment is educated guesswork. But I guess part of the controversy with the development, and this was the same at Geilston Bay, was the amount of work that had to go on associated with reducing the bushfire risk around the structures. And this in itself, quite aside from the actual footprint of the building, creates big environmental impacts. So we did promise each group only 5 minutes of questions, and we've already put Tony and Mario quite on the spot. So keep the questions coming in the chat, but let's put team 2 out of their misery in terms of making them wait, and then we can have fuller discussion afterwards, because all of these questions are great in terms of everyone getting in gear for the ministerial brief. On that, team 2, Sandeep, is that you sharing, or Parnika, it's you?
I'll start with my front end. I will be the first part, Ema.
Okay.
Can I start, Ema?
Go for it, 224.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon to all the survivors from COVID-19, and thank God that we are still alive. I'm Sandeep, the project manager in Tree Agency. Today we are here to discuss about the facts and impacts of property development at Rosny Hill. EI is playing a vital role all over the world since from many decades. Here on Earth, it is a conflict between human interest with the nature. As humans can hire an advocate to take on the project for their better benefits, environmentalists are opposing it. We Tree Agency are in this industry since from 8 years, and we are working on them. As part of protecting, apart from protecting the nature, our services include environmental clearance certificate, environmental consultancy, media and laboratory research, and creating EIA and EPA report for clients. And we are also certified in environmental consultancy management, quality management, and follow OSHA's rules to process the report. And here is my team. We got a young talented experts who look into various environment aspects in the project. And this is the projects which we just done previously. EMAR property, ELC property, and we are now collaborating with the University of Tasmania. And coming to the project background, the location of the site is 4.5 kilometers away from the Hobart city and 900 meters from Rosny shopping complex. Place is surrounded by suburbs and community buildings. The site is 20.9 hectares and owned by the Clarence City Council. It is a public activity and it is also a recreational place as well. Both public and private facilities will be developed in this location. Coming to the of development at the location, it consists of a hotel, restaurant, cave, and public view deck, walking trail, and also includes 114 car parking space. The development also includes, it is not more than two-story height. Overall height of the complex is low, and it blends with the surrounding environment. Interesting part is, from 20.9 hectares of land, only 2.18% of the land is used in development. Coming to the environmental facts like the flora and fauna, according to the NVA desktop survey, 14 threatened species are found, which followed by a field survey recorded no threatened species at the location, but found digging holes by Bannockot. Bannockot isn't a threatened species under TSPA. Vulnerable species environmental protection. Considering the species as vulnerable, further research has been progressed like neighboring interviewed and social communication, which lead to negative results for Bannockot presence in that location. Hence, it is clear that development for the development at Rosny Park is clear. coming to the flora, the leafy sun orchid, it is a non-threatened species, but because of unconfirmed records of the species at the location, no threatened towards flora impact in the development is considered. In flora species, if flora species are found, transplanting can be taken place to other area or propagating additional plants at the location is being done. Necessary precautions are being taken in preserving the negative species during development. Coming to the traffic impact assessment, the road links to the site are Rivan Road, Akuna Street, and Rosny Lookout Roads. Table present below shows vehicles per day in weekend, weekdays at normal and peak times. Records show that 6 crashes happened in the time frame of 2012 to 2017. All these crashes has happened away from the location. Um, Development will drop 400 vehicles per day, and at peak time there would be 43 vehicles per hour. For accommodating this traffic flow, road can be widened up with the existing road space present in the location. So with this, it is clearly that additional traffic isn't a going effect in local traffic area. Coming to the blasting impact in the area, uh, site is considered to be highly biodiversity protected area, and any further development need to meet the performance criteria. During the activity during this activity nesting breeding season, no human activity should be taken place, such as blasting should be conducted in the time frame of July to January. But researchers has found that no raptor nests are found within 1 kilometer radius at this location. What would the blasting impacts happen in the area? Uh, the land survey concluded at this site is confirmed composition of solid dolerite, which needs several drillings and blasting to remove or to remove the rock. Exploration can cause fractures of dolerite, which might lead to natural disasters in future, like soil erosion. Impacts on the dwelling who live near the site. Blasting can disturb residency who are peacefully sleeping or while watching AFL match or while preparing a vanilla pastry, with the noise and ground vibration and fume and dust generated during development. Blasting may also impact in futures which is unpredictable, such as the bushfires. Circumvent how to compress the blasting impacts in the area. Here we need to notify to the residents along with a chocolate cupcake at the time of blasting. A supervisor must be monitoring at the construction development site. Need to negotiate with the residents for blasting working hours, and must follow a blasting best practice environmental management studies and principles to reduce the negative impact for blasting. Uh, Thank you for patience and listening to me. Now I will hand over to my gorgeous team member Pranika, as she is explain about the legislation stage.
Thank you, Sandeep. My name is Parnika. Good afternoon, everyone. So the next part is planning and construction management. With our high construction standard, there are some following factors which are monitored strictly. First is personal safety. So whosoever is the authorized person entering the construction zone need to wear a personal protective equipment under World Health Safety laws. Second, construction fences to reduce the potential impact of construction on nearby surrounding and flora and fauna species. Fences will be assembled. There will be restricted working hours limit for the heavy vehicles, forklift trucks, and any other constructional activities to reduce the noise pollutions as well. Next slide, please. And for dust and smoke emission, under management and pollution control, the people working on the site need to follow appliances instructions to prevent overheating and causing fire. Next slide, please. The vehicles under use would be thoroughly washed to prevent spreading of the weed so that no more spreads or invasion of the species is in the construction site. And an additional detention tank will be installed to control water flow and prevent stormwater pollution. Next slide, please. So now we are here for the community engagement and the Rosny Hill development. Next, please. The Rosny Hill development has been in controversy since it was first proposed by the proposal in 2015. The opponent is the network of Friends of Rosny Hill, Friends of Rosny Hill Network, and the each and every member of Friends of Rosny Hill Network are highly informed and well educated. Over the decade of dispute, the Hunter development have agreed to reduce the size of development. But Friends of Rosny Hill Network is not agreeing on any sort of luxury development on the small hilltop. According to them, the development is too big and damaging to the small hilltop, which is a nature reserved for recreation and education. They compare the development with Kangaroo Bay development, where the hill is lost and hotel never completed. They themselves come with an alternative plan. That is, they want the hilltop to be used for recreational activities such as a playground, a cafe, and a lookout. Next slide, please, Sandeep. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the media has followed the case since 2015. It seems the media does not appear to favor either side. It constantly focuses on the point of controversial nature of the development and public disapproval. They also draw parallels to the developments such as Kunane Cable Car and the Lake Malbina Resort. So this is all the media coverage and community engagement. The next part is planning scheme. The Tasmanian planning policies play a significant role in Tasmanian planning land use system. Next slide, please. It includes the government policies and programs which falls under the Tasmanian Land Use Planning and Approval Act 1993, LUPA, which in turn forms a part of Resource Management and Planning System, RMPS, which includes the sustainable use of the land and development and should have no harm to the environment. Since the development is under the Clarence City Council, so Clarence Interim Planning Scheme 2015 is considered. The site assessment must be according to MCA 1994, Environment Management and Pollution Control Act, and since the site is an open reserve and habited to some significant flora and fauna species, therefore the assessment should meet the requirements of MCA 1994. Other laws which need to be followed is Water and Sewerage Industry Act 2008 for the water supply from the TAS water. And also the site assessment needs the approval of Major Infrastructure Approval Act 1999, which includes the development of linear infrastructure such as roads, pipelines, or anything related within the construction site. Now, these are all the legislation which needs approval. Let's go to the development application process. So the DA is processed with regards to prescribed criteria. First thing, you need a planning permit from the council to use the land for the development. Second, you need a representative who can communicate on the behalf of a proponent to the council. Pre-application process requires advice from the planning officer of the council to discuss the impact of development on physical environment and nearby residents. Then the planning officer finally do the site assessment considering all the issues related to sites such as water supply, waste disposal, or any licensing requirements. The assessment must meet the requirement of MCA and LUPA, which further includes the assessment on the level 1, level 2, and level 3 activities. The board will then conduct EIA, that is Environment Impact Assessment, to prepare environment effects report or a development proposal and environment management 1994. Final step of this is that if the person is not happy with the decision, they can do RMPAT, that is Resource Act 3, includes public involvement in resource management and plan. In the council are respondents, and Task Water and Tasmanian Conservation Trust are the support to the appellant. Next slide, please. Next, please. Next, please. Next, yeah. Now the last thing is how to lodge the appeal. First thing, the appellant must initiate immediate payment of the fee. Second, appeal must be submitted in written form. And the last, it must be filed within 14 days of the decision. Sandeep, can you go to the slide of DA? Last, yeah, back, more back. Sandeep, to DA slide. So the decision RFP frozen network, and due to COVID-19, the dates are postponing. So the decision is still pending. If you have further inquiries or information, you can visit our website, or if you are living nearby our campuses, then you can come into the office and ask us for further information or any sort of construction you want to do. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Team 2. Wow, stunningly different approaches from the two teams. So that's really interesting. You were all very, very awesome. So we do have some time for questions specifically delivered to Team 2. And then we'll open up a little bit more generally for anything that's come up for people out of this. So there were some earlier questions. Jem, did you want to ask about traffic? I know that was directed at the previous group, but I'm sure both groups could answer that.
Yep. So my question was just, Group 1 highlighted that the traffic will increase during construction to, I think, like 400 trips per day. And Rosny, as was pointed out, is already a pretty concentrated area. I was just wondering if it was said anywhere how long the construction period was meant to take.
Someone on Team 2 want to tackle that?
Yeah, I'll do that, Emma.
Go ahead, Arjun.
Cool. We have a permission from the council to complete the project by 2027, but based on the time period, I mean, the time we start the project, we might be able to, from the blasting to end of the project, we could complete the project within 2 to 3 years' time. Construction activities. Does that answer your question, Gemma?
Yeah, well, it's pretty significant in terms of the blasting. Obviously, dolerite's a really hard rock, and that's a pretty big area that needs to be, if the development's going to sit below the summit. I think it's a good point to kind of emphasise the two different parts of the environmental impact here. So thinking back to what Danielle said earlier, there's all the impacts around the actual construction that are quite different considerations to the operational impacts. So yeah, the blasting is going to be very annoying for a whole lot of people, particularly those living around the site, as is the traffic, you know, getting the rock to the site and all of the other activity is pretty big.
Emma, I do have a question for Team 2. I'd like them to just explain a little bit more about the details that you listed around the parties to the appeal, and whether you can elaborate on that a little bit more, in particular Taswater's role in the appeal.
Yeah, thank you. The question from Scott. Actually, there are lots of supporters for the RMBT to Rosny Hill because before appealing RMPAT, the range of Rosny Hills cover 1,500 letters and 500 supporters. But however, in this event, in a hearing event, just only about Taswater and Satmaya construction. They want to get involved in the to hear the appeal. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Any more general questions? There was a goodie around parties to the appeal because I did not know Taswater had joined. So was that information on the tribunal's webpage? Team 2, where did that come from?
That's okay, we probably put them on the spot. I might just take this opportunity to reiterate something just ahead of the ministerial brief, and that is the purpose of us providing this presentation. These two presentations was it was part of the extra percentage for the 581 people, so they had to provide, or they had to do a little bit more than most of the other people in the class, just because they are in the 25% unit. So bit of background to the 381s if you don't know already, but basically they were given a project management brief, and they had to provide us with Emma and myself, and then to you guys, a 10-page brief, which I believe is already on Milo, and then this presentation, which Emma and I will take away and arbitrarily provide a winner to the contract next week, which we'll announce next week. So we'll be looking at both your brief as well as your presentation today, and determine a winner. Just for the fun of it, there won't be actual brownie points for the winner, sorry, but yeah, so that's a bit of background for the 381s. But I guess I would like to take this opportunity to just reiterate the importance of doing your own research when you're writing your ministerial brief. So the purpose of the presentation and the 10-page brief is to actually, give you, the 381 people, a head start potentially. There's some information summarised for you. You then need to verify that information. So this is something that as a consultant you would do. So when I receive a report, I still do my own due diligence work and actually make sure that what's been provided to me is accurate. So I would urge you all to also do the same. So you've been given this presentation and given the 10-page brief, but you still should be verifying that information and pitching it in the way that you want to write your ministerial brief. So there's not largely a yes or no answer. There's no correct, not correct answer for the ministerial brief. Again, it's like the representation and very much like EIA. So there are a lot of, components of EIA that there's not necessarily a clear answer. It's more a relative thing. So it's a relative impact to something. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to kind of put that out there, that while you have had the presentation, you still should be making sure you double check the facts and that they're correct, because we would expect in the ministerial brief that the information is correct. And yes, there will be fudge. It's not quite brownie, not quite cake, but there will be fudge. But yes, I also wanted to just say that both of the presentations were very good, in terms of the approach that you took, two very different approaches, which is great. And I think, there's not again, there's not a right or wrong answer per se, but we will be looking at it from a more holistic perspective and looking at the information that's been provided, how accurate that was, and whether there were, you know, errors that we picked up or you know, gaps that we thought could have been better. I guess more things that could have been provided in particular ways, but both presentations were very good. So you should give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah, I know it's full, even though we weren't kind of allocating specific marks to this presentation. You know, it can be really difficult working in groups, and it's difficult public speaking. But, you know, both skills are really important in environmental impact assessment. Sometimes you do have to pitch, you know, even as a council officer, you might need to be pitching to aldermen. You know, there's all sorts of communication skills are really quite important in environmental impact assessment. So I realise we're getting close to 3 o'clock. Where is my PowerPoint? I'm just going to share, hang on, let me back up and get my 3 screens sorted. I have way too many options. And share, sorry for fiddling around. This one. And all right, can you see this okay? So this is just to remind you about some resources. So given that Rosny Hill, your final assessment is about the social and political context as much as anything, because it's a brief to the Minister and the Minister is interested in such things. If you don't know about our subscription to the Mercury, now's a good time to find out. So you all have free access to the Mercury. I use it all the time, admittedly, for teaching, but it is really good. And so you just need to set up and use corp address, and then this is what you see when you log in. Hi, Emma. I can read the paper online. And so this is today's paper. There's quite a bit of planning news in the paper today. The major projects bill stash, which is something that you could mention in the ministerial, because, you know, it's coming down and it may well be used for controversial developments. So that's on the front page. The government's threatened to withdraw support if Legislative Council alters the major projects bill so substantially that when it gets flicked back to the House of Assembly, it won't pass. The other thing on the front page, for anybody who's been following Lake Malbina, which has been constantly in the news over a really long period of time now, the proponent has lost their licence to one of their other tourism operations, citing politics. So, well, this slide has 2 purposes. It shows you how easy it is to cut and paste from that online view of the Mercury. Yeah, really good way to save things. So this was on page 4 of today's paper. So Daniel and Simone Hackett, who are the proponents behind Lake Malbina, have been operating on Tasland Conservancy property up at Skullbone Plains in the middle of Tassie. They said no reason was given for the decision. They say it's political. So this is the kind of thing that you would want to state in really plain language in a ministerial brief, so that the Minister doesn't get caught out with anything that might be lurking around the corner with Rosny Hill. And given that the tribunal is very live, you know, by the time you're finishing up your ministerial brief, this may well be at tribunal and it will be in the news every day. What you say is going to matter. So the other short thing before I finish and throw back open to any questions that people might have about Rosny Hill, I am nearly finished the representations. I have had lots of interruptions today, so I haven't got them completely finished, but I'll have another go now. A lot of what I want to say about the detail is I'm slowly putting it into week 12 webpage. So in general, a kind of scarily awesome job from a lot of you on the representations. Really quite a lot of great detail to show that you're across the process and across the site impacts, and not easy to do. And you've definitely done a much more impressive job on this than the past couple of cohorts. I shouldn't say that anyway. So if you want to go to week 12, as you're preparing your ministerial brief, that information is there, but we will specifically go through this in week 12, ready for you to submit sort of 10 days later. One thing that wasn't particularly well done in a lot of representations is how you referred to species. Names were kind of a bit all over the place for a lot of people, and that's fine. We didn't mark you down for that this time, but we will next time. It is really important, particularly for anybody graduating from your degree, that you do this really well. Particular pet peeve of mine. So yeah, we'll go through it in week 12. I don't want to clutter your brains now. Was there anything else? No, that was all.
Sorry, Hima, can I just quickly ask a question, please?
Yeah, go for it.
Do you want to show us the correct way to refer to species?
Sorry, say that again.
Do you want to just show us the correct way to refer to species so that we can take that away with us now to improve on going forward?
Yeah, I'll go through it in detail in week 12, but basically when it comes to both plant and animal names, you would generally in the text use the common name. Not all species have common names, so that makes it pretty awkward. But for the species that are kind of going to come up in Rosny Hill, I think they mostly do have common names. And so normally for ease of reading the text, you wouldn't say Eucalyptus globulus, which isn't on site anyway. You'd say blue gum. But the first time you mention that, you should be really clear which scientific name belongs to that, because, and blue gum's a good example, because blue gum is different depending on where you are in Australia. So what Orient, Tasmanians, New South Wales call blue gum is all different. So it's unambiguous to just say blue gum. You say blue gum brackets Eucalyptus globulus in italics and be done with it. But that's the professional approach. So same with species. You could say wedge-tailed eagle. You would then need the 3 italicized Latin words for the scientific name for the Tasmanian morph of the wedge-tailed eagle, and then be done with that long way of referring to it. So I'll go over that again in week 12, but it's in the week 12 webpage if you want to have a look. Okay,
all right. Thank you.
It's one of those things that, like citing legislation, once you learn it, it's you know, you can do it without thinking. But it's something that you're not necessarily getting taught explicitly in a degree. We just kind of think that you somehow know how to do this when nobody's taught you how to do it. So yeah, anything like this that crops up over the next 3 weeks, we can discuss in week 12 so that your ministerial briefs are on point.
Okay, thank you.
Jem, yeah, good question. So capitals also drives people nuts. So generally it's lowercase. So unless the actual name requires an uppercase, so the name of something, Stella's, I can't think of the name. You know, it's somebody's name, then that has to have a capital. Otherwise, wedge-tailed eagle, lowercase. Blue gum, lowercase. Yeah, I think you've got it. The first time you use it, use the full scientific name in brackets after the common name. You can, so that's the other thing, pet peeve, get the genus and species capitalizations right. So eucalyptus, capital E, globulus, lowercase g. I do get a bit excited about this because once you know what you're supposed to do, you see mistakes all over the place. Down at Bruny Island near back of Adventure Bay, there's some beautiful brass plaques acknowledging where the type specimen for Eucalyptus globulus came from, and the name is wrong on this expensive brass plaque. It's like, oh, it drives me crazy. All right.
Emma, I might just refer, there was two other questions in the chat bar, one to do with less mainstream media sources. So I guess the point that I wanted to make about that one was there are a lot of media sources who don't necessarily put out right information. That's not to say the Mercury is always right. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're wrong as well. But yeah, in terms of other media, I would be recommending ABC News. But then, yeah, there's not really other sources of media which I would probably recommend people to. The North would be The Advocate and The Examiner. But yeah, I would try to steer away, you know, particularly when you're trying to get some facts or trying to get some coverage of, how the media have covered particular developments. I would try and generally stay with the mainstream media because they do generally do their research decently well. And then the other question was about the major projects. Scott, major projects. So Scott had a question about whether Rosny Hill would be a kind of development that the proposed Major Projects Act would be designed to fast track. It's a hard one, particularly in light of everything that's been going on in the last couple of days. And if people aren't aware, in short, what's happened is the bill is currently with the upper house for review, and they flagged the potential for amendments. And one of them being around political donations, and those who follow the news will know that political donations is currently a very sensitive topic in Tasmania. And the amendments revolve around those people who have donated to a political party or politician would not be eligible to use the major projects process for their own projects. So that was one of the amendments that have been flagged, and along with a number of smaller things. But in light of that, what's happened is the government, so the Liberal Party, have indicated that they will not support they'll vote against their own act if those amendments come into play. So that's kind of, still a story that's all happening right now. But basically, because it's at the upper house, if amendments happen, it comes back down to the lower house for review before it gets to the upper house for passing. So so that's kind of all what's happened in the last 2 days as a summary. But I think it's hard to tell whether Rosny Hill the process itself is definitely suitable for projects like Rosny Hill because it is a multi-permit process. As to whether Circa Morrison want to put their project through that process is a separate question. And as I presented last week, we're talking, statutory timeframes of 349 days, which is, a couple of days short of a year. I'm not necessarily sure that it's going to be faster. It might be simpler in terms of not needing to kind of run concurrent applications, but it might not necessarily be faster in that from that perspective. But definitely Rosny Hill could be subject to the major projects legislation in terms of the complexity and the economic and social impact. So, economic, I guess, I'm not going to use the word, not necessarily significance, but it is, it's going to a lot of labour and the ongoing economy, the ongoing injection of money, but also the social impacts. So not only are we talking about recreational impacts, which would, probably be perceived as a positive thing, but also the social impacts of the Rosny area. So yeah, from that perspective, it could definitely be subject to the Major Projects Act, but it's very much, it's a hard one to call. Hopefully that helps.
I guess the other thing to keep a bit of an eye on is that the EPBC is under review, and there's currently a proposal to push EPBC process back to the states. So not necessarily something that you would have to kind of elaborate on in the ministerial brief, but this is something that could be mentioned to show to us that you understand this complicated social political context that we're asking you to brief the minister on.
That's it. And there is quite a bit of information on the EPBC review website. So if you looked up devolution of powers back to the state, you'll be able to find some information around that. In fact, in mid-August, I think it was, there was already a notice in the paper around the Commonwealth Minister looking to start the process of actually getting an assessment bilateral agreement between the Commonwealth and Tasmania. An approval bilateral. So at the moment we have an assessment bilateral, which means the state can do the assessment, but the approvals process is still with the Commonwealth. But we're looking at everything coming to the state, which is a big change. And I think there's a lot of questions to be asked around that process, and why we had the Commonwealth process to start with, and is the devolution of powers back down to the state essentially kind of going against what you had the process to start with. But there's a lot of media around that as well, so definitely there's a lot of EIA related talk in the paper these days.
Yeah.
Can I quickly ask you a question, please?
Go for it.
Yes, thank you, Emma. Concerning the reflection that is due on Friday for the 25% cohort, what do you expect from us in terms of, like the word limit?
I don't think we've given you a word limit, so have a look at the rubric to see what you need to say. I'll go back and double check on that. It is the length it needs to be in order to answer the questions to the best of your ability and as fulsomely as you think is necessary. So it's worth 10% of your overall mark, which give you some guide. I wouldn't be writing 3,000 words. 1,000 words is probably enough, thinking off the top of my head. Maybe you wouldn't even need that much. Thanks, Belle. What else? Did anybody have any burning questions or was confused about anything that came up around Rosny Hill before we sign out?
Can I ask something quickly about the Rosny Hill?
Yep.
I was just reading the anonymous representation you popped up, and I was just wondering what bearing the lease terms on the actual site have, because there was some mention about the lease only must be consistent with the management plan for the site, but basically the development wasn't consistent with that, and I was wondering what bearing that had on the actual approval process.
That's a really good question. I essentially put the same question to the Friends of Rosny Hill, because you would think that the proponent would want a lot of certainty around the lease, given the investment and the fuss that's going on. And they weren't all that clear about it, except to say, obviously, when the proponent has invested so much in the site, the lease is a minor matter. And the answer was complicated by the history of the site. So this is where next week will be quite valuable. And I know that you can't be on site, Sam, but so we get it all on video, but it's enough to ask some of these details, because the back history of this is that it used to be the state government who had management responsibility for the hill, and they neglected it. And so the local residents were quite excited when Clarence took over the management of the hill, only to find that nothing much happened. In fact, if anything, it got worse. So the lease is complicated by that history, and I don't entirely understand it, but I'll make sure that next week we do get it sorted out between the person who's meeting us at 2:30, who happens to be a very experienced engineer who has an amazing mind for detail and has been very involved in this development from the get-go, very, very opposed to the development, and Ray Burton, who's appearing on behalf of council as part of the tribunal. Between the two of them, they are totally over all of the details of this proposal. So I'll make sure that somebody asks about the lease.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, so just to prompt, I guess, either to feed questions to me beforehand if you can't come on site, or to make sure that you at least flick through the documents quickly beforehand, because this is a really great opportunity to ask two people who are on different sides of the discussion some both kind of more values-based, philosophical, social questions about the development, as well as some of these nitty-gritty procedural technical matters. Hopefully the weather cooperates. It can be very blustery out there. Quinn, you asked about the Sun Orchid assessment. Oh yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't delved into the documents very much, except to see that there's quite substantial parts of the North Barker report that are now, say, they're superseded. Can anybody who's been in the groups who've been looking at this in detail answer Quinn's question? Otherwise, we might need to take this over to next week. Like a lot of the people in doing 381, I'm only just getting my head into this now, but these are really good questions and they matter. I'm going to stop the recording.